Hello, this is Mrs. Callan. Today we're going to take a look at how to read and mark up text when we're reading in social studies. So we're going to start with this text about the Eastern Woodland Native Americans. So what's important to remember is that we are not going to highlight as we read each paragraph, but we're going to read each paragraph first and then go back and look at key words or phrases that stand out to us. And the reason we wait until we are done the paragraph is that we need to read the entire paragraph until to determine what is the main idea or what is most important about that paragraph. So I am in Kami right now, and I am up taking notes on this PDF. So I'm in markup here, and I'm going to use the highlighter. So we're going to read the first paragraph, and then we'll highlight some keywords and phrases that stand out as part of the main idea of that paragraph. So the first paragraph reads, "The Eastern Woodland culture consisted of native tribes along the eastern coast of the United States. The tribes east of the Mississippi River and the tribes in southeastern Canada. The eastern woodland area is known for its large amounts of rainfall, numerous lakes, rivers and streams, and great forests. In fact, the abundance of forests gave this region its name. In some areas, forests are so thick that sunlight can barely reach the ground." So what I would go back and highlight is that that this area is known for their rainfall, their lakes, rivers, and streams, and the great forests. In addition, if I were thinking about that whole paragraph, I would ask myself, what is that main paragraph telling us about the Eastern Woodland? And that paragraph could be summed up in one word, and that is geography. So I could make that a margin note on the side that that paragraph is about geography. That way, if I'm going back to fill in notes later, or I'm looking to study and I need to remember the geography of the Eastern Woodlands, I have a note here to remind myself where to go. All right, let's take the second paragraph. Again, we're going to read the whole paragraph first and then go back to highlight some of the main ideas. The earliest known inhabitants of the Eastern Woodlands were the Adena and Hopewell tribes, settling in the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys around 700 BCE. They are best known for being hunters and gatherers. Yet eventually they settled into villages and began cultivating crops. The Hopewell were noted for their large burial mounds where they cremated their dead. Hopewell Culture National Historical Park, located in Chillicothe, Ohio, contains several burial mounds believed to have been created between 200 and 500 CE. So if I think about this paragraph and I think about what it's about, I notice they start with inhabitants, right, in that first sentence. And sometimes in informational text, the main idea comes in the first sentence. So this clue about inhabitants lets me know what that paragraph will be about. And they did talk about that. When I'm going to write on the side, I'm not going to write inhabitants. I'm just going to write people. So this paragraph really told me about the people of the Eastern Woodlands. So now if I go back to highlight, I can use a different color. I'll highlight the Adena and the Hopewell tribes because they were the earliest known inhabitants. I'm also going to highlight where they settled, the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys. in addition to around 700 BCE. These were also known as hunters and gatherers, and then they settled into villages. So those are my last two things that I'm going to highlight in this paragraph, that they began as hunter-gatherers, and then they settled into villages and began cultivating crops, meaning that they settled and became farmers. All right. So this next paragraph starts at the bottom and goes up to the next. And I'm going to read the whole thing before we mark it up. Soon, hundreds of other native tribes, such as the Illinois, Iroquois, Shawnee, Cherokee, Creek, and the Seminole, started to populate the area. Despite having their own unique tribal customs, all eastern woodland tribes shared certain characteristics. For example, tribes of the eastern woodlands usually maintained complex societies with strict class divisions. They were typically governed by a chief and his family, with commoners near the bottom of society. Tribes of the eastern woodlands were also hunters and farmers. The men hunted deer, rabbit, and squirrels from self-made bows and arrows, knives, and clubs, while the women tended garden plots where beans, pumpkin, squash, corn, and tobacco were grown. In fact, corn, beans, and squash were so common among eastern woodland tribes that they became known as the Three Sisters. If near the ocean, tribes were known to supplement their diets with fish, clams, and oysters. If I think about this paragraph, it starts off talking about the people again, right? And their complex societies or their structure. And so I'm going to put the word society here. So this is run by the chief, and that there are commoners near the bottom of society, but that there were lots of different customs for the different tribes, but that they all had this similar structure. So we'll use green for that. And we're going to say maintained complex structures. We'll also highlight the chief as head of that structure, and that commoners were near the bottom of that society. They also had distinct roles, which is part of that idea of society, right? The roles. And so the men were the hunters, and the women would grow the crops, and then if they were near the ocean as well. So in this part, it does talk still about those roles, but I would also add that this part is about their food and what they ate. And so we'll highlight that with a different color. So these are the things that they hunted. The men hunted. And we have that the women tended their garden plots. And finally, they could supplement their diets if they were along the coast. All right, let's take on our next paragraph. Homes of eastern woodland tribes also shared many similarities. Taking advantage of the plentiful, lush forests, many tribes built the wigwam, a small hut usually made of wattle and daub. Wattle is a collection of interwoven sticks, twigs, and branches, and daub is a sticky mixture of mud, clay, and sand. The roof would be constructed of bark from trees. Another common home was the longhouse, which was able to house several families together. Tribes in the warmer South used moist clay as a roof instead of bark to keep the inside cooler. While the general structure of the wigwam and longhouse were the same throughout, tribes often varied slightly to account for local circumstances. So this paragraph, again, that topic sentence, right, the initial sentence of that paragraph gives us the main idea where we're talking about their homes. And a few key things were brought up in this paragraph about their homes. So it says here that they took advantage of the plentiful lush forests. So they used their geography to create homes. And there were two homes that were important to them. So the first is a wigwam, a small hut. Oops, let's undo that. Okay, back to it. So we're going to do wigwam. And then the other house that was discussed was the longhouse. All right, so we're going to get to our final paragraph. We've learned about the geography of the Eastern Woodlands, the people, their society, their food, and their homes. And we'll take a look at this last one together. Tribes in the Eastern Woodlands all had slight variations in their belief system. However, almost all believed in what is called the Great Spirit. The Spirit was believed to be in all living and non-living things and was responsible for all actions in life. 2. Religion among Eastern Woodland tribes was heavily influenced by nature. Almost all Eastern Woodland tribes have creation stories that tell how the earth was formed, and each of these stories is heavily focused around animals. So this last paragraph is about their beliefs. And two main ideas that were brought up in this paragraph were the idea of the Great Spirit and the last thing was these creation stories, which we learned about when we studied origin stories, right? That different Native American tribes had their own stories about how things came to be. So I want you to take a look at this page here and the readings and the markups that we did. And you'll notice that the highlighting really stands out as just taking some words and phrases from each paragraph. You'll notice that I have not over highlighted any paragraph. And my margin notes help to serve as a guide for me to go back. So the purpose of taking notes or marking up text is two things. The first is to help us to stop and make sure that we understand as we read, because that will help us to remember the information better. And the second reason to mark it up is so that we can go back if we do not remember, and if we're looking to study. So let's say we created a study guide and we really needed to make sure we remember the food of each tribe or each region. So I could look at the Eastern Woodland and look at my margin notes and say, oh, this was about the food, right? Finally, if you go back and you take a look and you read only the highlighted portions, you should be able to get a very good sense of all of the main ideas of this text without rereading the entire thing. So as we go through social studies this year and as we go through this unit, we're going to practice marking up our text and making sure we understand all of the new things that we learn.